Good morning, everybody. This is Thom Kleiner, Director of the Westchester-Putnam Workforce Development Board, and it's my honor and pleasure to welcome you to the 2020 annual meeting of the Westchester-Putnam Workforce Development Board. Obviously, we're doing this a little differently than we normally would. We, at this time, be expected to be having a very nice breakfast at the Putnam Golf Club. Since Putnam, we alternate between Westchester and Putnam each year for our meetings, and Putnam is technically the host this year. So while we're missing out on that, the silver lining possibly is that we have the opportunity to have many more people participate and hear what we have to say. And we're, particularly interested, given current events, and fortunate to have County Executive George Latimer from Westchester and Deputy County Executive Thom from Putnam, who are going to be able to join us very shortly to give their perspectives on current conditions. And then following that will be a panel keynoted and moderated by Melinda Mack, head of NYATEP, who's waving up in the corner, at least in my corner, I can see her. And Chris Neale from New York City, giving a really unusual and interesting perspective from the largest area, of course, in New York for workforce, and Laura Quigley from Sullivan, who's going to give us a little bit of a different perspective, given a different kind of market. So to join us. So let me first recognize from Putnam Thom, the Deputy County Executive.
Great. On behalf of Mary Ellen Odell, we'd like to thank our partnership with County Executive of Westchester, George Latimer, and the partnership of Westchester County Workforce Investment Opportunity Area, and all the representatives of the business and educational community who are part of this virtual meeting today. We'd like to thank the panelists who are going to extend their expertise to our workforce area and help to reimagine employment in the face of this pandemic. Thank you, Thom Kleiner, the Executive Director of the Westchester County Workforce Investment Board, and his staff for all they do. And in particular, thank you to our County Commissioner of DSS, Mike Piazza. Also recognize Carl Rohde, our Veterans Services staff, and Marie Daly and Kathleen Mallon, who invest so much of their time to help Putnam One Stop Center. Obviously, everybody knows this COVID pandemic has certainly shaken our country, our counties, and like little else has ever done before. So perseverance and sacrifice is a big part of what is going to bring us out of this terrible, terrible place we're in right now. As a region, we continue to open and try to stabilize our economy. Putting people back to work is part of that. The one thing that we've been able to do here in Putnam County is really work with our EDC. We've got Kathleen Abels up here, has done a great job in conjunction with Sean Rogan from our health department, and then kind of put a partnership together with the local towns and villages and really let the community, the business community, know that we are here to help them and vice versa. And with your partnership, we can start backfilling jobs, and hopefully as the economy starts to reopen, it's going to be a great partnership where you can feel the support, and that in itself will help even mentally for people. I know now a lot of these phases have kind of gone back and forth, and people are kind of worried about where they are. Some just a couple of days ago we found out that some of the malls and gyms and things like that, they're kind of lack of a better word, in limbo right now. So we're trying to help them, and your partnership with the One Stop is a great asset and resource for our community. So I know we're running a little late, so I don't want to hold you back. But Thom, again, thank you very much. We appreciate being here.
Yeah, thank you so much, Thom. And obviously Putnam and Westchester are bordering but different counties in many ways, but our charge is to provide the services that we can as best we can to both. So thank you for your partnership, and Mary Ellen and your team. Westchester County has obviously started as the epicenter of our current crisis, and because of George's leadership as the county exec and his staff, Department of Health, et cetera, have really done an amazing job. And to speak about that a little bit and to see where we're going as we approach a new beginning, I refer to George Latimer, County Executive, County of Westchester.
Thank you, Thom. Appreciate being with you and everybody else here today. And I'm very happy to be partnering with Mary Ellen and the team in Putnam together to try to advance some of these issues. They're critical issues, and even more so now than in the first couple of years that I've been in office. Folks, I think this is a terrific opportunity. The panel with Melinda, Chris, Laura bringing perspectives from different kinds of settings is important for us to understand, because the region that we're in and the region that we're adjacent to in New York City, and for that matter, the tri-state area, have all different elements of circumstances: the size and the scope, the degree of density, the type of employment opportunities that exist in a suburban county, in an exurban county, and in the biggest city in the hemisphere are very different, and yet we're all close together. And we're interconnected. When we talk about opening in these phases, phase 1 and phase 2 and 3, from one region to another region, Westchester County can't be fully open to a phase 3 until New York City is. We have 200,000 of our residents under normal circumstances that commute into Manhattan, the Bronx, Brooklyn, and Queens every day for their employment. So we know that we need to work regionally and cooperatively to make this happen. And we're in a region that includes Sullivan County and Orange County and Ulster County for opening based on the COVID standards created by the state. And the success of Sullivan County is important to Westchester County. The success of Ulster and Orange County is important to Westchester County. So I view that interconnectedness as very important, and I think the Westchester-Putnam nature, the cooperative nature of this board is critical. From our standpoint in Westchester County, we've been very fortunate to have a very good team of people together. And while I appreciate, Thom's nice comment about my leadership, from my corporate background, I understand it's always a team of people that lead. There is a head of the team, but there's also people who bring specific expertise to that team. We're very fortunate that Bridget Gibbons and the economic development team that we have here, Deb Novick, Sherry Rosen Asher, all under the direction of Joan McDonald, our director of operations, who, by the way, is a Putnam County resident. We have a couple of key people on our team that go home at night to Putnam County. And they've been able to do some things that were very important in the economic bounce back, employment bounce back. Our economic development team has made a significant effort to reach out to local businesses to help them where they need the help to qualify for the federal loans, the EIDL program and the PPP program. When you have a mom and pop business, they don't necessarily have the expertise amongst themselves, nor necessarily the time and energy to be able to go through the bureaucratic requirements of filing and making the connections necessary to acquire the resources that the federal government made available to us. And they did an excellent job of doing that. We've got to make sure that to have the economy bounce back, we have to have our transportation system bounce back. And that transportation system has to be as fully operative as it can be and as soon as it can be, so these things will happen. We've made some decisions to try to be helpful to our taxpayers, extend the period of time of when they would be able to pay taxes without penalty if they're affected by COVID, to show that we're all in this together, because it's not just the economic problems of the individual and the economic problems of the small business. It's the economic problems of the big business and the economic problems of the government.
So, no, thank you, George, for your comments. And I was serious. It really does take great leadership to get us through this, and we appreciate it. So just a couple of brief words about the Westchester-Putnam Workforce Development Board. I'm going to save most of what I was going to say now for later for the panel, if that's appropriate. But I'll just say this, since March 20th, we've been really operating in a very different environment like everybody has. And the interesting thing to me, at least, is that, and certainly the county execs probably found this as well, that those who have dedicated staffs, as we do here at the board and at our career centers, we're really able to adapt and use telework in a way that we didn't necessarily think possible. So we've been able to continue to serve our customers, our job seekers, as well as our businesses, maybe not in the same way as completely as we would have liked by having in-person contact, which is always preferable. But, it's going to be certainly the case as we move forward with the Department of Labor in terms of servicing those who are on unemployment insurance. It's not going to be the same world, when we're open for customers. I mean, I'm in my office now and we're open for staff on a 50% rotational basis following the County of Westchester guidelines. And we're going to continue to do that. But when customers come back, it's going to be a whole new world. And we're going to explore that in our panel in just a moment. I just want to add one thing about teleworking. One of the offshoots, of course, and this goes beyond us, this really goes to the county execs and national leaders. As you've noticed, you know, pollution has gone down, commuting times have gone down. So, you know, what we do in workforce is going to be mirrored, I think, with what happens in the business world. And, you know, we're sort of a bureaucratic institution in many ways by necessity. So maybe we're going to have to follow the lead of the business community, but we're going to see about that. And we'll talk about that in just a moment. Last thing I just want to mention, our staff, I just want to have a shout out to Linda and Charlene and Bob and Leslie and others who have participated in Department of Health COVID-related work. So contacting people who tested positive here in Westchester, and also now working on the contact tracing project, and also doing some career center duties at the same time. So everybody really has stepped up and will continue to, and we just want to acknowledge that. So I'm really excited to introduce Melinda, who is sort of our boss. Now, when I say that, I mean the workforce development directors, and she's laughing about that, but I say that, and Chris and Laura might agree. She is really our leader, is really the right word, because she is head of NYATEP, which is the organization that coordinates with us as Workforce Development Board directors to advocate, to keep us up to date on state and national prerogatives and initiatives, and has really held us all together during these difficult times. And she previously was interim head in New York City, among many other things, working in the Bloomberg administration. So she has a long and varied history, and it's needed now more than ever. And it's my honor to introduce her. Let me just say one last thing. For those who may think that she looks familiar, that's because she was here last year as well. And we just threw out the rule that you can only come every other year or whenever it is. We needed her back again because of the circumstances that we're in. So Melinda, thank you so much.
Well, thank you. And bear with me as I share my screen here, because I do have a couple of slides. I appreciate that I am now sort of a person who gets to come back. I mean, I'm glad that I have the honor of being a person that you want to have back every year, hopefully. But hopefully in the next sort of phase, it's not because we have a crisis that we're dealing with. And as Thom has shared, and I do also have to give kudos to not just Thom, but to his staff, to the workforce board directors. As you all know, this has been a time of fast and rapid shift and change, and us having to adapt pretty quickly on the ground, but with also very little information around how we're going to do that. So I'm going to do a couple of slides here to sort of describe what we know right now, sort of what we're thinking about, and then I'm going to turn it over to our panel. We have an incredible panel who's going to share their insights with you all as well, mainly because we want to make sure that you're starting to understand the scale and scope of the work ahead, which is more gigantic than anything that any of us have ever seen in our careers and in history. So a few things that I wanted to share. Very early on in March, right after everything started to go down, I actually convened a group. We were jokingly calling them the workforce OGs, the old guard, folks who had retired, individuals who'd been in the system for a long time, had sort of worked in many different divisions, to have a conversation around what did we learn from some of the past recovery efforts. So what did we learn in the 70s, the 80s, the 2001 after 9/11, thinking about the last recession, Hurricane Sandy? What are the bits and pieces that we should be pulling out of there to really understand how to structure this recovery moving forward? A few things that I just wanted to highlight. I'm not going to read the slides because you guys can read them on the screen. The biggest, specifically this time around, the labor market data always looks backwards, right? And the role of a workforce board is to help support and gather that workforce intelligence, which means really what's happening on the ground right now. We know that not all the sectors are going to recover equally. We know that some are going to take a very long time to return. Some may never return to sort of pre-2020 levels. But only way we'll know that as a workforce system is if we're in constant communication with the business community around what they're seeing every day. We also know, again, if you're a workforce person, it takes a long time for the federal government's workforce money to catch up, meaning that you may be feeling strapped to do things and to respond in a significant way, but you won't have the dollars at the ready. It doesn't mean that you can sit back and wait. It means there's a significant amount of planning that has to start right now in order to be able to really think about what the recovery looks like. And part of that planning is really around understanding the capacity of the partners and the supports within the region. And so we've been telling our members, including colleagues of Thom's from across the state, this is the time right now to understand what is the capacity of the childcare system? What is the capacity of the education and training system? What about the network of nonprofits who have been supporting many, many individuals who need food assistance, who need support with literacy needs? Because of the strain that this is causing on the labor market, but also regional economies, many of those resources are also feeling the pinch in terms of having to lay off staff, being able to open the doors, slow recovery, phased reopening, et cetera. And then lastly, as Thom mentioned, a lot of our work is dictated on what happens with the unemployment insurance system, recognizing that that is an important and critical benefit to supporting individuals who are out of work. And so the timing of when folks come on and off unemployment insurance has a major impact on what we see in terms of volume coming into the career centers, or at this point coming into virtual or remote services. Chris, it looks like I shifted to one of your slides there. Hold on one second here. All right, so what we know about the current, from past recoveries. Oh, I don't know why it's doing that. Sorry guys, now I'm turning into one of those folks who is having tech problems. So what we know about this recovery. So as you know, this hit really fast. The variability of when those stay-at-home orders were issued, in addition to what we're seeing in terms of phased reopening is really sort of impacting and changing the way that this recovery is happening. Again, if you're a workforce person, this chart is burned into your brain. Like, this is something you will never forget, because the incredible impact of the claims, and you saw that at the number of folks who could not get through to UI, it's amazing in terms of what the size and scope of this is. I think the county executive really stressed and is right. There's a lot of fear around returning back to work, to returning normal activity. And I think in terms of what we're even seeing in the South right now, a recognition that we are nowhere near as out of the woods. I think we sort of took a few steps into the forest, and now we're starting to try to figure out what the path forward is to the other side. The last thing that I will say, and I think it's important, and I'm going to have a few slides on this moving ahead, is that those who are already struggling were significantly impacted, which is really driving race and equity and this concept of equity and inclusion to the forefront. And I'm going to show you a couple of data points in a moment, but before the economic downturn, the vast majority of the jobs that were being created across New York State paid less than $32,000 a year. And if you're someone who lives in the Westchester-Putnam region, you know how far $32,000 a year goes. And what we do know is the sectors that have been hit most dramatically typically are those lower wage occupations, or occupations that primarily had individuals of color or individuals who had low basic skills. And so I share that because I think what we're recognizing is this is not the same as the 2008-2009 economic recovery in terms of who was being laid off, the types of jobs that were being impacted. But in addition to that, I think what I'm recognizing is that we did not do our jobs well the last time around to ensure that more people were insulated from economic downturns. It is really important for you to get a scope of or understanding. So every week right now, and this is not something that Department of Labor typically does, they are putting out a look into the initial claims that are coming into the Department of Labor for unemployment assistance, and it's a weekly report that comes out. So what you can see here is if you look at this report, when you think about what's happening, the vast majority of the claims that are coming in accommodations and food services, arts, recreation. We're seeing a huge impact around healthcare and social assistance. As many of the folks who are on the call who are part of healthcare know, there's an impact, of course, if you can't have elective surgeries. If you're a dental office, you know, there's a lot of things that folks are putting off or are unable to participate in. And so it is causing a shortage or a jump in unemployment for healthcare. Also, anything that is like a personal service. So if you're getting your hair cut, a barber, tanning salons, as the county executive shared, are seeing a significant jump. And the far right there, what you can see is the real impact here for folks to take a look at is we are at about 3.5 million people who are receiving some form of unemployment support right now across New York State. The unemployment rate in Westchester is around 11%, and in Putnam County, it's around 10%. And if you use this as context from the last recession, again, that was a tough time for many of us. It was a really significant influx of customers coming into career centers. The number of people on unemployment insurance was around $850,000, and the unemployment rates in Westchester and Putnam were really around 8%. So again, when you think about the scale and the scope, it's pretty significant. And I just want to make sure that folks recognize that we're really talking about 3 or 4 times the impact of the last recession. All right, and then this is going to be my last slide, and I'm going to turn it to Chris. I think one of the things that I will share is that the impacts, again, in terms of really looking at who has been impacted, statewide, accommodations and food service, retail, arts and entertainment. Again, drivers outside of the financial sector are huge drivers of the Westchester-Putnam economy. What you see on this chart, what the bubbles show you, is the lighter color are really around those who require less education to participate, so a lower barrier of entry into being into that type of job opportunity or that sector. And then the closer you are to that bottom right-hand corner of the chart is how vulnerable your job is in this environment. And so what this is showing you in terms of the earnings, in terms of the vulnerability of your jobs, really the low wage work is what's been directly impacted, meaning that individuals who are going to need our support more now than ever are likely going to be those who have, again, a high school diploma or less or some college, individuals who are in accommodations and food services, retail trade, arts and entertainment, those personal services. We're going to need to sort of figure out ways to sort of support those individuals in a different and new way. So with that, that's sort of my level setting so that folks are on the same page around what's happening here. What I'd like to do now is to introduce our panelists, and I'm going to actually, I know Neale has some slides to share with you as well, but I'm joined today by Neale, who is the director of the New York City Workforce Board, as well as Laura Quigley, who's the commissioner of the Sullivan County Division of Community Resources, as well as the director of the Sullivan County Workforce Board. Both are dear friends and colleagues and folks who I would trust with my workforce strategy at any moment in time. So with that, I'm going to actually turn it over to Chris. I know he has a few slides he wants to go through and have you sort of describe to us what's happening in your region.
Good morning, everybody. And I want to thank Thom Kleiner for inviting me to speak today. My name is Neale. I'm the director of the New York City Workforce Development Board. I work for the City of New York in the Mayor's Office of Workforce Development. And I want to start by talking a little bit about my own experience during the pandemic. These are some images during the peak in New York City. So I live with my family in New York City, but not in the dense urban jungle of Manhattan or in the diverse hipster-infused borough of Brooklyn, but in arguably the most ethnically and linguistically diverse county on the planet, Queens, land of 160 languages. And Queens has definitely been in the news as the hotspot within the epicenter that is New York City. And in fact, I live a few miles from Elmhurst Hospital. One of the pictures in this slide shows Elmhurst Hospital during the peak, where there was a real concentration of cases and deaths. My wife and I actually believe that we both caught COVID-19 back in late March. It was after I'd already stopped commuting to and from my office every day in Manhattan. We can't be sure because we never got tested, but we were both sick for more than a week, and thankfully with very mild symptoms. Both of our kids missed a week of school back in February, and in retrospect, we think they may have had the virus as well. So COVID-19 has been real to us for a very long time. Next slide. So let me give you a brief background on the New York City Workforce Development Board. We oversee an area with, I think, the largest population of any board in the country, 8.4 million people. We convened our last quarterly board meeting on March 17th by conference call, and we've actually been meeting twice a week just to talk and share information ever since then. So let me give you a little bit of sense of our system here in New York City. So we are an employer demand-driven system. That means that we start with the job opportunities. We want to know where the jobs are, and then we want to work to find the people who can fill those jobs. But we also target specific populations. We tailor our services to meet their needs. We've got 18 what we call Workforce One career centers. including a few that are sector specific and population specific. Annually, we serve about 100,000 customers, train about 4,000, and connect about 30,000 people to jobs. Next slide, please. So by late March, I mean, the city basically shut down in mid-March. We closed our centers in mid-March. And by late March, we were able to launch virtual services in all 5 boroughs, which is a real testament to the New York City Department of Small Business Services. They're a city agency who administers the adult and dislocated WIOA programs in New York City. And you should know that typically the city does not deliver human services directly itself. We typically contract with outside providers, and so our Workforce One career centers are managed by providers. They quickly shifted their work to phones. We set up an online portal, which you can see on this slide, and basically it lets job seekers indicate the kind of work that they're looking for, the borough that they live in, and then staff has been following up with them by phone. And the volume started small, but it grew really quickly. So from late March to the present, we've served over 30,000 customers. We've developed more than 6,000 open job opportunities with more than 400 businesses. We've referred 13,000 people to job interviews. And so far, we've helped connect 1,500 people to jobs, and there are many more pending a response from the employer. Next slide. In addition to hiring, we have also made a number of our training classes available remotely. So this slide gives you a sense of what we're currently recruiting for and what we're currently training for. You can see it spans everything from commercial driving, healthcare occupations, tech occupations, cable installation, and the like. So I want to shift down to a sort of a bigger picture view of the pandemic and its impact on New York City. I mean, the first thing to emphasize are just the sheer numbers. So this data is from a couple days ago, but in New York City, we had 215,000 confirmed cases. I think that's more than China got. And we've had 18,000 COVID-related deaths. I mean, these figures are absolutely staggering. Next slide. I think it's also important to emphasize the economic impact. So when you think about New York City's economy, back in February of 2020, we had about 4.7 million jobs in the economy. But as of the most recent report that Melinda alluded to earlier, there were 1.3 million New York City folks who had applied for unemployment insurance, 1.3 million out of that 4.7 million. That is a huge, huge proportion. We had the fortune of having an economist, James Parrott, speak to our board a few weeks back, and he wrote a really compelling piece about job loss back in April, but he predicted that job loss would be heavily concentrated in what he calls face-to-face services, where people are interacting with other people. And so that has really borne itself out in restaurants and hotels, among taxi drivers and bus drivers, in non-essential retail, and in personal services like hair salons, barbers, tattoo parlors, etc. Next slide, please. It's also important, I think, to emphasize that the economic impacts are not hitting everybody equally. And Melinda alluded to this earlier. There are a lot of figures on this slide, so let me try to briefly explain them in plain English. So if you think about all of the jobs in the New York City economy before COVID, so the 4.7 million, that's like a big pie. Let's call it a pumpkin pie, because I love pumpkin pie. And the first column, the portion of all workers pre-COVID, that's the portion that group made up of all the 4.7 million jobs before COVID. The second column, the portion of all workers who lost their jobs, it's like we took a big slice out of that big pie, and the slice represents everybody who lost their jobs. And so the second column reflects what share of those lost jobs does each group represent. So look at income. So workers earning less than $40,000 a year. So before COVID, they were slightly more than half of all workers in the New York City economy, which in and of itself is pretty astounding. But they comprise 64% of all the workers who lost their jobs. So that is a disproportionate impact on low-wage workers. By contrast, people making $100,000 or more were 18% of all the workers of that big pie before COVID, and they're only 10% of the people who've lost their job. It's the same with education. It's the same for people of color, for immigrant workers, and for independent contractors, otherwise known as gig workers or 1099 workers. They were 9% of the workers before COVID, and James Parrott estimates that they comprise 16% of all the workers who lost their job. So COVID is really having a disproportionate economic impact in New York City on people who are lower income, people of color, people with less education, and immigrants. So let's look at the link between poverty, race, ethnicity, and COVID-19. Now, just to give a quick caveat, this analysis is mine. It's not an official New York City analysis. But what this chart shows is the blue line is the group of zip codes in New York City that have a poverty rate of less than 10%. The orange band shows zip codes that have a poverty rate of 30% or more. And when you compare the two and you look at the zip codes with a poverty rate of 30% or more, what you see is that those zip codes have twice the percentage of Black residents, 4 times the percentage of Latinx residents, 30% higher rate of COVID cases, and a 50% higher COVID death rate. So this helps illustrate that in New York City, it really is our low-income Black and brown communities that are experiencing more than their fair share of job loss and more than their fair share of COVID-19 cases and death. We, and particularly white people, need to shine a light on this. We need to talk about it. We need to listen deeply to people whose experiences we may not share, because the COVID-19 pandemic has laid bare the legacy of slavery and the years and impact of structural racism on the housing, health, education, and jobs of the Black and brown communities in New York City and in places across the United States. Next slide. So what is our board going to do about this? Well, we're figuring that out. We're trying to figure that out. Before COVID, we were focused on developing a strategy to promote and champion high road employer practices within the business community. We want to keep that, but we want to modify it and really do it through the lens of racial equity. We're going to do readings. We're going to do a facilitated conversation. And we want to develop an action plan for members in their own organizations and also to promote across businesses in New York City. We don't know what that will look like. It could include things like unconscious bias training, diversity and inclusion in hiring and promotion, diversity in boards of directors, in employer leadership, suppliers, and we probably will highlight historically low wage jobs.
And Chris, your last slide particularly interesting, because preceding this meeting, we had the Westchester-Putnam Workforce Development Board meeting, and the executive committee had drafted a social justice resolution, which we tabled, frankly. And the reason for that was because we wanted to focus on some action items and not just make, another organization making another statement about social justice or the lack thereof in our community. So thank you for those, for that last slide, because we will consider that in our own board discussion. It's extremely timely. And you really had some amazing statistics with regard to how many people you've been able to reach remotely. And my only question for the moment is, did you encounter problems with regard to people, particularly those who are low income and otherwise at risk, in not having the technology necessary to be able to participate in that training or in those services?
Absolutely, yes. I mean, the digital divide is huge in New York City. Our mayor's office for the chief technology officer put out a report in January talking about, I think there's something like 29% of New Yorkers lack reliable high-speed internet. And there's not a lot that we can do about that because it costs a lot of money to resolve that problem. However, I will say that to his credit, the mayor and the New York City Housing Authority put out a request for proposals to try to bring internet access to a number of NYCHA developments. And so we're hopeful that that will start a string effect, or rather a ripple effect, where more and more New Yorkers will have access to the internet. But it's a huge problem here.
Well, and I think the other piece to just underscore, and there's a couple of questions coming up here around impact. I think the one thing that I will say is any sort of data that we're seeing right now that articulate the impacts for specific populations, you have to recognize they're still just estimates, and it's still really early to be able to understand the specific impacts. So there was a question in the Q&A box specific to individuals with disabilities, and I will say there's no data that lays out, there's already bad data on individuals with disabilities in terms of being able to really understand and parse out the service delivery structures and what's working and what's not working. But when it comes to looking at unemployment insurance data and labor market data, we don't have good information yet on impacts around specific populations. So if you're asking how are people who are formerly incarcerated faring, how are individuals with disabilities faring, how are young adults faring, we don't have a ton of good data. I will say sort of the rule of thumb, and I would be interested in Laura and Chris's perspective on this, if you were struggling to make it in the labor market before, you will be having a behemoth of a time trying to make it in this labor market. And so it's not not a good news signal, but it is certainly an issue that we're all going to be struggling with statewide. I do want to turn it to Laura a bit to talk a bit, to juxtapose the rural environment and element, right? You probably weren't riding the New York City subway to get to work every day prior to this. Laura, what are you seeing in your region, in your community?
We are quite different, quite different from New York City, but a lot of the same issues, just on a different scale. You know, Sullivan County, we're at the top of the Hudson Valley region. We actually border the Delaware River, not the Hudson River. We're about 100,000, we're about 1,000 square feet, and we have about 77,000 residents. We do in the summer tend to have a population that can go up to 250,000, which is a significant worry for us right now as we're slowly reopening. We are predominantly white county, but we have 17% Hispanic, Latino, and 10% African American. 50% of our folks have a high school diploma or less. Our per capita income is $29,292, and our median household income is $56,256. And we average, it's been running pretty steady, about a 16% poverty rate, but a 21% poverty rate for children, which has always been just a real problem area for me, just as a personal thing. We have approximately 7,700 businesses, and they provide, you know, in February, they were providing about 29,300 jobs. In April, it's about 3,300 jobs less. We're predominantly 91% service-based. That's our job base, and that is in education and healthcare and government and leisure and hospitality. Those groups account for 71% of those service-based jobs. And overall, about 50% of our jobs are found in the nonprofit and public sector. So we have not diversified as much as we would like. We've struggled for many years, but since the recession, we have a good economic development team that really doubled down, and it helped us to land the Catskill Resorts World Casino and the Cartwright Water Park, and had this wonderful rebirth of economic development in the county that brought us to the point of having historically low unemployment rates that we had never had before. And so where in December of 2010, our unemployment rate's 9.6. In December of 2019, it was 4.6. Significant increase in our job opportunities. And when the COVID-19 hit, our unemployment rate, those lovely low unemployment numbers that we were seeing, went out the window, and we are back to high unemployment, which we know how to do. What we don't know how to do is high unemployment and a pandemic. That absolutely shuts everything down. And so for us, we had 1,415 positive cases, which in comparison to what Westchester and New York City went through is small, but it's not small for us. We have one hospital with X number of ICU beds, and that was big. We have well over 3,000 people in isolation and quarantine and all that contact tracing. And unfortunately, we had 47 deaths. We've had about 8,000 claims for unemployment come through. And with everything shut down, what we have seen is the clear interconnectedness of everything. One of our most significant industries up here is agriculture. When schools shut down and restaurants shut down, hens are still laying eggs. There's still beef cattle. There's still, all of those things are shut down. So then the impact on the agricultural industry for us has really been significant. And it's, when you are in a small area and your resources are limited, one of the good things about it is that you get to consistently color outside the lines because you have to. Everybody has to sort of do whatever you need to do. And so when this hit, that was something, that was a normal thing for us to do. Everybody was like, okay, everybody's going to split it up. We're going to do this. The county immediately put together a recovery work group to work on the economic development side of it. We were part of that. We continue to be a part of that to make sure that all the businesses applied for as much PPP and EIDL, and they released and redirected loans within the county and made them available to all the small businesses. We kept everybody up to date on the UI information. We used our social media to blast as much of that information and tips and out, and we continue to do that using our chamber. The one thing that gives me hope for us is that unlike the recession where we were already in economic trouble, we got hit when we were strong economically. So we feel that we won't be coming back from so far behind. And that kind of gives us hope. We have a better foundation moving forward. However, for us, technology remains a consistent challenge. In a rural area, we have limited broadband. And yes, the county is working heavy and hard and fast to address it, but that takes a long time. And so we immediately moved to phones when everything shut down. We don't really offer a lot of virtual because it's a challenge. But we have worked with the county to have laptops that we can lend people. We're looking at purchasing lots of tablets for people. And we're immediately outreach to strengthen our partnership with our libraries so that we can make a lot of things available to individuals at their libraries when they reopen, be it online training, we're doing a lot of virtual. We created a Zoom resume building seminar. We created how to interview through Zoom, how to complete applications and whatever online. And so we're doing down and dirty virtual stuff that we can get out the door to people quickly. And at the same time, the county had asked us, talk about coloring outside the lines, we set up an emergency community assistance center and used the career center to begin with because it was closed. And we wanted to make sure that the essential workers and other vulnerable members of the community had food and medicine and masks and everything else. So all the workforce staff, as well as others, worked on that. We fielded about 1,000 calls of need from that. We put out about 73,000 meals and over 17,000 masks. And that is now permanently housed in a different location, but it remains part of us. And it will be there to pop up whenever we need it. There are two very different worlds in Sullivan County. Sullivan County is an absolutely beautiful place for anybody that's been up here. And two very different worlds. And when the pandemic hit, it really brought it into stark relief. You have folks that could telework or could stay home and collect the unemployment and the 600, and they could homeschool their kids and go bike riding and take advantage of all the trails and all of that lovely family time, which God bless them, glad they could do it. And then there's the whole other end of the county that has to go to work because they have to pay the rent. And that's at our food and poultry plants. And that is predominantly our Hispanic and Latino population. And the virus hit them and hit them hard. And families were put in quarantine and isolation, and the impact on them was so significant, as well as our grocery store clerks, as well as our people who all of a sudden lost their childcare. Schools are closed, which was their childcare. And so the impact on that end, the pandemic has not been a lovely time for them. It has really exacerbated a lot of those equalities, whether it's poverty, food insecurity, which we've realized is far worse than we thought, the racial inequities, the transportation, childcare issues. And it's allowed us, though, being shut down to have daily walk-in traffic, to step back and see, with all of our partnerships and our nonprofits, this is what's working, this is what's not, these are the holes. And so we're hoping that we can start to knit a stronger safety net moving forward. And we've made a decision in workforce that we're going to permanently color outside the lines when it comes to making sure that all the basic needs are being taken care of, and expand what we do beyond training. We are now looking, because the predominant people that were hit are our low wage workers. What's the training online that they need most? And what's short term because they need to get to work? They don't have a lot of time when they're home because they've got their kids running around, or if they are out of work right now, they need to get back to work as soon as possible. So we're looking for that short-term training, and we can talk about careers later with them. We want to make sure all their basic needs are taken care of. So that's kind of—
So Laura, I'm gonna stop you there, because I think you raised something really important that I'd love to get Chris and Thom's feedback on. And it's coming up in the question and chat box as well, is I think we recognize that the workforce system in many ways has been part of the construct that's been putting people into low wage work, right? Like a lot of the jobs that tend to be in the job bank, a lot of the jobs that we're sourcing for individuals tend to be lower wage work. And I think one of the things that we're recognizing as a workforce system is we're also having a bit of a reckoning here around what is our role and responsibility to quality jobs, as Chris described, but also supporting the business community increase the quality of work and wages across the region, recognizing that like we still are a demand-driven system, right? Like businesses need to lead, but we have a role of supporting businesses and leading. So I'd be interested sort of in Chris, Thom, and Laura's perspective here around what does that look like in terms of how we actually reconcile supply and demand, but to make sure that the supply of candidates really do have the skills necessary and are supported in a way to take those higher quality jobs. I don't know, Thom, I'm going to bump to you first, and then I'll sort of rotate around the group.
So one of the things that we started to do before all of this hit was to meet with educators and guidance counselors and others who are interacting with young people at an early level. I think we actually had high school guidance counselors, but we were advised really got to start in middle school to try to get young people more interested in, you know, what we normally refer to as STEM or STEAM careers, and to try to expand the ability of going into occupations that might not be promoted as much as they should be, because people, depending on your demographic, are more interested or focused on college, where, as we all know, there are many different routes to take to be successful in a career. And the interesting question to me is how all of this is going to impact that discussion, which was, again, already ongoing before any of this this hit, but clearly to expand the ability for people to go into technical trade-based careers is something that one would think are going to we're going to have to focus on coming out of this, particularly.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm going to turn to Chris. I think one of the challenges, and again, this is a political challenge for regions, is quantity versus quality. And when you have, 3.5 million people who are out of work, who need to be reemployed, there's always a push to sort of reach as many of those people as humanly possible, which spreads the money really thin, making it tough to do those in-depth quality programs that get people into good paying jobs. Chris, I think you guys are going to have one of the biggest challenges ahead. How are you thinking about this concept of job quality and getting people into good paying job pathways?
Yeah, I mean, it's a tough one. I think there's sort of 3 strategies that we're thinking about. The first is the city of New York, since 2014, has taken an approach called career pathways, which is a familiar concept, I'm sure, to many. But we really are trying to encourage all of the agencies that do workforce development in the city to invest as much as they can in good training, apprenticeships, college education where appropriate, to help people find those jobs that can help them better support their families. We're also trying to promote high road business practices among our business community. And it's something that's still in its infancy for our board, but we want to try to make the business case to businesses that by investing in their workers, paying them more, giving them better benefits, that will ultimately impact well on their bottom lines. People will not turn over as quickly. It will offer better customer service, and hopefully that will lead to higher profitability. The third piece is really structural change of the economy. We are bumping up against, frankly, like we try to do as much training as we can. We try to get employer input into our trainings, but we've run out of a lot of the sort of entry and mid-level training opportunities that we think are good for people that tend to come through our Workforce One Career Center doors. There was a piece today, some of you might have seen it in the New York Times by Thomas Edsall, and it was called, "Why do we pay so many people so little money?" Right? And it basically is a cry for, we have to re-examine low-wage work. We have to think about why people make so little money and why people can work so hard but still not be able to support their families. You think about home health aides, these are grueling jobs where it's primarily women of color, a lot of immigrants in New York City, and they're basically earning minimum wage to offer very difficult services to the elderly, to the sick, to people with disabilities. So, you know, I think we really need to start confronting how we've structured low wage and essential work in the US. That is a tough one, but it is a necessary one.
Mhm.
Yeah, and it's interesting, Chris, because I think part of this is, you know, I've been going across the state talking about very similar issues, and I think the initial reaction is like, oh, this is just a very lefty progressive point of view. But when you really dig into the labor market and the structure of the economy and our ability to support that structure, considering the individuals who live in our communities, is actually becoming more of an imperative if we want to be economically viable. If we want to be a region that's able to support the people who live in our region, if we want to be able to support commerce in our region, we actually have to think about the structure of the jobs. So Laura, to your point before, I think you're really thinking about how you round out to make sure people in some ways have all the assets they need around them in order to be able to go into sustainable employment. I know you as one of the more creative people in the sector, again, the color out of the lines. How are you thinking creatively about attacking this issue?
Well, one of the things that we're looking to do is, besides, you know, online learning and all of that stuff, is to begin bringing our bringing our trainings to people, right? So we're looking at bringing our trainings to the housing complexes, to the and to move it out. Especially because we now don't have to have all these people in the career center. So we're rethinking what we have one career center. We're rethinking how we do that. And rather than having people come to us, how do we meet people where they're at, number one? How can we partner with, we have a lot of programs around teaching lower wage workers, not teaching them, but having them access healthier foods, making better choices. How do you tie that with training for better employment? And how do you tie that? I mean, one of my big issues is childcare. We had a serious lack of childcare prior. It has been exacerbated by this pandemic. We need a economic development entrepreneurial approach to childcare. We need to create more childcare businesses, but that needs to be subsidized so a childcare provider can make a decent wage and make it worthwhile to do it. It's as hard to get that as it is to fill home health aide positions. It was interesting for what Chris and Thom had said before. We found a lot of our small businesses with the coming casino, water park, and all of that pressure, a lot of our small businesses started to significantly raise their wages. But those businesses that economic development got kudos for because it's a numbers game, not a quality game, those are the businesses that really their workers got more severely impacted by it. So we haven't figured it all out, but the county is very much on board with this new division and whatever to, for me to figure it out, and my board. But we're looking at intergenerational opportunities. We're looking at how to integrate our veterans more heavily into solving these problems as well. We just don't have a plan yet, but that's what we're working on doing.
Let me just say, we're at about 10, but we're going to continue if everybody is okay to do that for a little bit. We had some questions we wanted to answer, and we appreciate everybody sticking with us. Almost all the participants have stayed, so I understand some may have to leave. So before that, let me just interrupt the Q&A for a second, because in what we do, meaning Melinda and Chris and Laura and all of our colleagues around the state, sometimes hearing directly from those who we serve is really illuminating and terrific. And so we just had 2 one-minute videos that I wanted to share for Bo from Putnam and Alyssa from Westchester. So
I feel like because we're at 10, I would love to get those like closing thoughts from Thom, Chris, and Laura. We have a bunch of questions that we meant to ask you and we didn't because we ran out of time when you answered them in some of your statements. But I think one of the pieces that we're hoping is that the next stimulus that comes from the federal government includes a sizable chunk of resources for the workforce system. So by comparison, in 08-09, ERA provided us with a pretty significant amount of funding. In some ways, it almost doubled the workforce funding coming to the state to provide resources. Some of the more recent bills, like the HEROES Act and others, provide very limited resources to the workforce system. What do you think is really going to take? You know, when you think about the types of investments, the types of resources, the types of programs you're going to need to invest in, I think we recognize not one size will fit all, but there are some key things that you're hoping to invest in to really transform your regional workforce system and the regional economy. So again, what's your hope? What's your big innovation idea? What's the thing that you're hoping you can get funded in order to be able to do something really meaningful? Chris, we'll start with you.
So one of the ideas that we've been working on in New York City is the idea of what we're calling a recovery corps. And it's a recommendation from the mayor set up a task force on racial inclusion and equity. And this is one of the recommendations of that task force. But the idea is to combine COVID response and recovery related job opportunities with longer term education and career development focused on low income and COVID impacted communities. The idea is we want to invest in people. We want people to be doing recovery work, and we want them to be learning and earning. We want them to be participating in again, long-term education or training on the side to the extent possible. It is kind of a twinkle in our eye, but we would love to see funding that would allow us to do that kind of thing, kind of like a works progress administration type program meets AmeriCorps. We launched a small version of it with a group of CUNY students that are acting as resource navigators. So we've got contact tracers who are identifying people who have symptoms or have the COVID illness or who are in contact. The resource navigators are the ones who are helping those folks figure out, how am I going to get my groceries if I have to stay at home for 14 days? How will I get infant formula? How will I get my prescription? So we're working with community-based organizations more broadly, but one group is CUNY students. And so that's kind of our test run, but we'd love to make that much bigger and encompass a lot more types of New Yorkers.
That's great. It's sort of a WPA, but better, which I think is pretty exciting, the Works Progress Administration. Laura, what's your big hope? If you could do your big innovative idea, what would you invest in?
Well, it depends. Typically what happens with recovery money is it is focused on what's going to benefit urban and suburban areas. It's not typically what benefits rural areas. So I'm certainly hoping that it is not for high wage, high tech jobs, which tends to be where the focus lies. I'm hoping that it has lots of flexibility, and especially around support services that we can provide around technology. The one thing that we have been spending an awful lot of time talking about is the ability to serve more youth that don't necessarily fall under some of the constraints within WIOA, but focused on healthcare and focused on work experience and internships wrapped into training. We have a thing here, our BOCES suspended all adult education. So we have lost a tremendous amount of education opportunities. So we're trying to replace that, working with our college. So that's really the one area that we've been really focused on is our youth. So lots of
That's
flexibility.
That's great. And it's interesting, like we've been saying, you know, computers and broadband are the new work boots. That's what we've been telling our members of Congress. If we can't buy people computers and get them access to broadband, they are not going to be able to function in the economy, in the future economy. And so I think part of it is how we shake off some of the cobwebs of law and legislation and funding that just doesn't work in this type of structure, to your point. Thom, what are some of your big ideas? What are you hoping to get out of this?
Well, you just mentioned one. I think, you know, given our discussion this morning, I think it's clear that we have to get the tools into the hands of more people who can benefit from our services. I mean, I don't know if it's 29%, the digital divide in Westchester-Putnam as it is in New York City, but whatever the percentage is, you know, our core mission and what we were doing essentially under normal times, we'll call that mid-March, was to serve those who most needed our services, those who were low income, those who had barriers to employment, whether those were, you know, disabilities or childcare, transportation, language. And, you know, as Melinda mentioned earlier, those are the groups that are really going to continue to be impacted as we come out of this. And they're going to need our help even more than ever, even though what we're going to be doing collectively is, as we did in 2009, 10, 11, you know, initially we assume we're going to be servicing a wider demographic range of people, but whether it's a year or two, or whatever it is, it will eventually come back to those who most need our services, who can't get them otherwise through private institutions, et cetera. And let me just add that there were a couple of questions that we didn't get to, but a couple of them had to do with how are we reaching out to business and not-for-profit and upskilling people. And there are opportunities now through free services, not always free, but free now through Metrics Learning and through Coursera learning programs, where if you go on those websites, and we can share this information after this, you can upgrade skills, you can take a whole bunch of courses to prepare for credentialing and things like that. So there are opportunities, given that the crisis is affording us, that we need to take advantage of, and also partner with our not-for-profits and others in the community working toward these same goals. So I think we're all in this together. We have no, you know, maybe other than Melinda, we have no magic solutions. We'll test it. No, I know. But look, you know, we're all trying to figure this out as we go. Nobody has been through this. We can't, for, you know, obvious reasons, always look to our governmental leaders to provide the way, because, you know, they may not be providing them. That we have to look to ourselves and to our constituents and to our collaborators to really provide leadership. Melinda is doing that. Chris is doing that in New York, Laura in Sullivan. And we really, really appreciate their time going overtime today to share their views. And so before we finish, we're going to give one more shot to those 1-minute videos, because I think we would all appreciate what they want to share with us. And then we'll come back and give a formal closing and goodbye.
There's a couple things I wanted to say about my experience. One is surprised and pleased at how fast the process went. Wally and Michelle Bear responded very quickly to my needs. They helped me find a school program to engage in, and they helped me to do all the paperwork between the school and the state. And of course, they funded the education, which I greatly appreciate. There was such a great amount of respect. I was concerned at the time. Obviously, when you get laid off from a position, you're feeling a bit low or unsure of yourself. And both Michelle and Wally were very respectful and treated me like a human being, not down on his luck and couldn't find work or lazy or anything like that. I mean, there was none of that. There was like, okay, we understand what you're going through. This may be an option, this KSEC certification for you. And here's how we go about getting it.
Alexis.
Hello, my name is Alexis Boyd. I'm a participant at the Center for College and Careers. March 2020, I completed the FutureWorks program for construction training, where I received 8 certifications. During my training at FutureWorks, I mentioned to Enrica that I would love to be a part of our team. I just never knew that there was a free, life-changing opportunity located right in my community. April 2020 is when I got to start my first work experience at the Guidance Center as a security guard. Due to COVID, I didn't get to interact with many clients. However, the transition from student to employee felt great. Currently, I'm working for the Murphy Brothers Contracting as an administrator, a company I went to visit with the FutureWorks during my training. I absolutely love my job, and I am very thankful for WIOA and the FutureWorks for believing in me and always pushing me to be my best.
So Melinda, Chris, Laura, thank you so much. Thanks to all the participants. Thanks to our board members who were able to join us this morning. And we'll have to do this again, maybe not in a full year. Given circumstances, we will figure out a way to, it's a lot easier to get Chris and Laura and Melinda to show up on a screen than it is to come to a golf club in Putnam or someplace in Westchester. And so we'll take advantage of that. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks for having us.